Greetings, Wilkinson here. Today my guest is Scotty Darby from Phoenix, and Scotty is an Airbnb guest with a very colorful background. Say hi to my people.
Well, hello, Wilkinson's people.
Glad to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for the courage to sit behind the mic.
Well,
You said you never did this before.
No, I've never done anything like this before. So
Where do you want to start?
Oh God.
Tell a little about your background to start there.
Okay, let me see. I'm a 52-year-old gay man living in Phoenix. I was actually born and raised in a small town in Illinois called Danville, which is about 2.5 hours straight south of Chicago, right on the Indiana-Illinois border.
I think I've heard of it, actually.
It's right near Champaign-Urbana, where the University of Illinois is.
Okay.
So, yeah, and my hometown is known for when they were choosing all the institutions, the city got the choice of the University of Illinois or the Veterans Administration, and they chose the Veterans Administration.
Huh.
So that was a little interesting.
Wow.
But I lived there until I was 17, left for college. But when I was like 8 or 9 years old, I saw The Goodbye Girl, the movie with Richard Dreyfuss and Marsha Mason.
Uh-huh.
And she was an actor in New York, and I knew that's where I was going to live.
Really?
So pretty much from the time that I saw that movie until I left to go to school, I was biding my time, basically, because Danville was like...
Far away from New York.
Yes, far away from New York. And, you know, like we would hang out at McDonald's on Friday night. You know, that was the kind of town Danville was.
Well, at least you had a McDonald's.
Yeah, this is true. We had a McDonald's and a steak.
I've talked to some people, they go, oh, we got to drive in something.
Yeah.
Bank or a McDonald's or something.
Exactly.
So you weren't that hickish.
No, Danville actually was a little bit of a town. It wasn't as country, but just right up the road, you were right in the middle of agribusiness because, you know, Illinois is one of the huge agribusiness states. So that was very much adjacent to how I grew up.
So did you ever go cow tipping?
Never. I never went cow tipping, but yes, I know what it is.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it sounds like we're going in a direction of another story of law of attraction.
Oh, there you go. Pretty much.
Okay. So you left town at 17.
I left town at 17. I was actually accepted. NYU was starting a musical theater program, and I got accepted to that. But my mother didn't want me to go because it was too far away from home. And I actually chose not to go.
Because she didn't want you to go?
Because she didn't want me to go.
Oh.
I wish I would have gone.
So
but,
small regret.
Exactly. So I ended up going to a small university in Decatur, Illinois. And
how many miles away?
Decatur, gosh, I don't know, like maybe an hour and a half away. So.
And she didn't get that an hour and a half is enough distance. You could still get in trouble.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But she could come and get me.
Uh-oh.
That was what that was.
Oh, brother.
But I went to Decatur and I only lasted 2 years. I knew that I wanted to be, I was going to be a Broadway star. I was going to be the next Mandy Patinkin.
Wow.
And I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I actually decided to leave undergrad and I moved to Chicago. And I went nuts in Chicago. Chicago was supposed to be sort of my in between living, in a kind of rural area to going to a city, and then I would move to New York. And Chicago was not about becoming an actor. Chicago was about me coming out. So I knew when I was 5 years old that I felt something different. I didn't know what that meant, but I have a distinct memory of my sister's fiance was taking me around, and I remember we stopped and we went to the bathroom, and I remember being in the urinal next to him, and there was this like, what do I want to say?
Electricity.
Yeah. It's funny. I've been listening to Eric Marcus podcast. He wrote a book on gay and lesbian history.
Okay.
And he describes for himself a liquid bliss.
Wow.
Is what he felt. And that's, ever since I've heard that, that's the feeling. I love that phrase.
Huh.
So I sort of felt that. And then I sort of had these little crushes on boys, but I didn't really know what that meant.
So your sister must have been quite a bit older than you.
Yeah, she's 13 years older.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And so I always knew I was a little different. And then when I reached high school, I started thinking, oh gosh, I might be gay. I did my first play when I was in first grade, and I did theater for, that was my extracurricular activity from the time that I was, in first grade until, I left to go to school to study theater. So I was around all of these gay people who never said they were gay. Pretty much. And so when I was in high school, I actually went to my first adult bookstore. And
the plot thickens.
Exactly. And my heart started racing. I went to the back room and did what one does in the back room. And I instantly felt shame because I grew up religious.
Wow.
So, my mother was Catholic and my father was Lutheran, which is basically Catholic without the kneeling. And
I've never heard that. That's funny.
Yeah. We always called it Catholic Light. But
isn't that Episcopalian though?
Oh, the Episcopalian's like, yeah, whatever.
Okay. All right.
But I instantly felt shame. And so even though I felt shame, I kept having these urges. And so I would go to the bookstore and I started buying magazines and I created a scrapbook
of your favorite models,
of my favorite images and things. And finally, when I was 16, I actually admitted to a friend, I think I'm gay. And that was as far as it went. That was as far as it went.
What was your friend's response?
She was, she was absolutely.
Well, she was your gal pal.
She was my gal pal.
Okay.
She was my gal pal. I'm sure that there were other emotions because she was also the first person that I ever had sex with.
Oh.
So I'm sure that there were other emotions there.
Which came first?
Me.
You had sex and then you told her?
No, actually, I told her first.
And then, really?
And then we had sex.
Was she trying to convert you?
Honestly, I've never asked her, so I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know.
Because that's kind of a theme with other people I've talked to.
Yeah. I kept it. I kept it pretty silent. So we didn't really talk that much about it. But then when I went to college, I actually had an experience. I'd had one experience, one significant experience when I was still in high school. I was at a community theater festival, and we were in a hotel, and there was this guy, Ken Jacobs. I will never forget his name. And he was, oh my gosh, Ken Jacobs is why I have a thing for Jewish boys.
You just realized
I'm
that,
just
right?
realizing that right now. But,
wow.
Ken was the first guy who I actually did things with. This was before I started going to the bookstore.
Okay.
And I'm in college, and my first week there, I meet this guy, and we end up fooling around, and then again, just shame, and I remember kind of cutting that guy off, just like totally ignoring him, and that was a really crappy thing to do. But I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to deal with it.
Did you ever see him again?
I saw him around. He was very gracious with me, and for that I am grateful.
Did he know you were struggling?
I didn't really talk to him that much about it, but I'm assuming that's why, because he was actually very compassionate with me. But when I left college and I moved to Chicago, that's kind of when I had this conversation with myself, a conversation that no one should ever have to have with themselves. One night I was in bed and I couldn't sleep because I was wrestling with it. And I just said, God, I know I might go to hell, but I have to do this. I think I have to do this. And no one should ever have to have that conversation. And so I kicked the closet door open, and boy, did I kick it open. I was a young kid. I was 19 years old, living in Chicago with friends that I went to college with.
And what year was this?
This would have been 1989.
Okay, so the AIDS thing was already going on at that
Yes.
point. Okay.
Yes, it was. And really, being in Illinois,
you felt insulated?
I didn't really hear about AIDS until Rock Hudson died.
Wow.
Yeah, I had no idea about, the listening to Eric Marcus in his podcast, knowing that there was a New York Times article in 1981. I didn't know any of that. And there I was, just coming out into this world in Chicago. And that's a whole topic in itself,
Wow.
Coming out at kind of, the ramp up of the AIDS crisis,
Right. How long were you in Chicago?
I was in Chicago for a year.
So it sounds like a pretty interesting year in Chicago.
It was. I was working at a costume shop, which is where I learned how to sew.
So was that associated with theatrical stuff, I assume, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. They also did rentals for, personal rentals. It was a huge shop.
Well, like Halloween stuff? It wasn't like wedding, like tux stuff, right?
No, yeah. Like if you were doing an event and you needed, costumes, you
needed to be a leather rabbit or something.
There you go. There you go. I actually, this was when the Bulls won the first national championship. I was working there.
So what were the costumes?
In Chicago, they, I can't remember which museum it was, but they had commissioned us to make these 2 huge Bulls basketball jerseys that they put on these Grecian female statues.
Really?
Yes.
That's kind of fun.
I made those. It was really cool.
But how big were they? What size were they?
Oh, they were huge.
Size 100 or something?
The width was probably a good, 3/4 of the space of this room.
Really?
Yeah, they were
huge.
Yeah, they were huge. I believe, I can't remember, it wasn't the Museum of Science and Industry. I think it was the Art Museum. They have these 2 large Grecian statue columns.
That's cool if they did something fun like that.
Exactly. But I was doing that, and then I was also stripping. This was back when we actually took our clothes off.
Oh.
We weren't just dancing in a jockstrap, which I do now, by the way. And you
do?
Yes. But I was stripping, and I was drinking heavily and doing drugs.
And you were 19.
And I was 19. And my mother saw that I was going nowhere, and she begged me to go back to school. And I said, okay, I will go back to school, but we're going to do it my way this time. I'm going to New York. And so I finally got to New York when I was 19, and I turned 20 in New York.
So the moral of the story is if you would have stripped when you were 17, it would have got you.
It would have got me straight to New York. Exactly.
Great. So what did you do in New York?
I went to this school called the American Musical and Dramatic Academy, and it was basically acting classes, dance classes, voice classes. It got me to New York, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I was finally in the place where I felt like I was home.
Did they have dorms, or where did you live?
So I lived actually across, the school was in a historic building on 75th and Broadway called the Ansonia. And I actually stayed across the street at the Beacon Hotel, and they had rented housing there. And so that's where I was. In fact, the Beacon Hotel had a theater, the Beacon Theater, which is actually now they've redone it and it's a great venue. But all of those Tyler Perry movies were actually stage plays first. So I actually remember those TV commercials for the stage play of like Diary of a Mad Black Woman, I Can Do Bad All By Myself, all of those. I remember those as being stage plays, which was kind of cool and dates me a little bit.
So you were into drinking and drugs in Chicago.
Yes.
Did that carry over into New York or no?
Yes, it did.
Uh-oh.
Yes, it did. I grew up around, or I actually come from a long line of alcoholics, but none of us. It wasn't. There was no mention of the word alcoholic. So it was just that we just drank heavily. My 21st birthday was spent drunk, crazily drunk, in the median of 76th and Broadway, yelling at people to honk at me because it was my birthday.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, at least you remember you were there.
Yes, this is true. Then I stopped remembering.
Uh-oh.
And then I started pursuing a career in acting. And if you are an alcoholic and a drug user, the worst thing that you can do is put yourself in a profession where you are told no on a daily basis. What I did not realize was I very much believe in the disease concept of alcoholism and drug addiction. Mm-hmm. What I did not realize is that I had a voice in my head that kept degrading myself. And so I would drink to quiet that voice.
Right.
I did pretty good throughout my 20s, though. It wasn't too bad. It was when I hit my 30s. That's really when, that's when I discovered, I discovered, can I say it on the podcast?
Sure.
I discovered crystal methamphetamines.
Oh.
And that was amazing. It took away all of my inhibitions. It took away all of my shame, because when I came out, sort of the shame of being someone who is gay, that kind of went away. When I was early in New York, I went into a gay card store, and I found this picture of this man dressed in leather pants with a mirror cap, laying back on a motorcycle with his arms, with his hands behind his head.
Right.
And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And so I started going to the leather bars, and I knew that was a piece of me that I needed to discover. Mm-hmm. So I bought my first pieces of leather in like the early 90s, and I would...
Back when it was affordable?
Exactly, really. And I remember several Friday nights getting dressed in that leather and walking to the front door, and that same shame that I felt had just transferred to the leather.
It did.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say that you were free of it when you put the leather on.
Nope.
It transferred. Wow.
No, it transferred. And
because leather is bad, or what?
Yes. Well, that was the story going on in my head, because I like to do things sexually that normal people usually don't like to do. And so I would get dressed up Friday night, walk to the door, feel that shame, turn around and take it all off and get dressed and go out. And
really?
Then I would drink. And that happened for a long time. And then I found meth, and that allowed me to bypass that shame and it didn't bypass the shame, I should say. For the moment, it
quieted it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And then, I would feel that shame for days after. So it actually prolonged my shame and made it last a little bit longer.
Where did the shame regarding leather come from, do you think, as you look back?
It's
because, the Lutheran and Catholics weren't talking about leather, I'm sure.
No, they weren't talking about leather.
How did that transfer to that, do you know?
All of my friends were quote unquote normal, and
after a year of podcasts, normal's not a word I want to use.
There you go. I liked to get tied up.
Uh-huh.
I liked to be hit with things. I liked things that you can't really talk about, openly. And the leather bars were very much these places, dark and seedy, and and there's a Russian excitement to that. Now that I'm past that shame,
right?
But back then, I wasn't sure how to process that, and I would go and I would do things, and I would feel that shame, and so I started using crystal meth, and it got to the point where I started missing work and friends were wondering what was going on. But I was never a tweaker that lost weight. That's what really upsets me. But it did get to a point where it got in the way. And
Right.
In June of 2002, I was trying to get my life together and trying to financially put my stuff in order. So I had talked about just setting up an IRA and buying a life insurance policy for myself. And it was then, because when you buy life insurance, you have to take a blood test.
Uh-oh.
And so I found out I was HIV positive.
Hmm.
Most people hear news like that, and it's like the worst thing in their lives. It actually, I look back on it now, it was really one of the best things that ever happened to me.
It was like a wake-up call?
Yeah, because it put me on a path. It put me on a path of, I want to live. So it put me on a path of becoming healthy, physically healthy. And later on, I learned mentally healthy. I went to my first 12-step meeting in 2001. I did not get sober until 2015. I struggled with it for a long time. I was not a very successful actor. I was a working actor, but I would not consider myself successful because I was not on Broadway. I worked mostly outside of New York, and I had something happen. I was doing a European tour, and our tour bus hit a stalled car on the Autobahn. We lost all steering, and we went through the guardrail and flipped down the side of a mountain.
Whoa.
Yeah. And that moment in my life made me realize, okay, I'm not having fun doing what I'm doing. And I think I need to study as an actor. And so I started studying a technique of acting, and I loved it. I loved the camaraderie of a studio. I loved that I had a creative home to go to. I loved that every Tuesday was about me, doing my craft. And I stopped drinking and doing drugs as much. And so my mentor, Sandy Sharon, just wonderful mensch. She helped me grow up. I was doing a class called Breakthrough that had nothing to do with stage work. Her technique was all about bringing yourself forward, who you have to become to play this person. You are the person hired. So there's something about you that they like. So who do you have to become? She had studied with Meisner. She was very much a part of sort of the avant-garde theater scene in the 60s in New York. And then she started working a philosophy called the Landmark Forum. And within the Landmark Forum, you sort of have a project and you develop this project. And her technique came out of her work with the Landmark Forum. And it was the one technique that actually resonated with me. I understood her language. And this breakthrough class, you can't bring yourself if you're not working on yourself. And so this breakthrough class was about working on ourselves. And she was the first person to call me on my stuff. Money was always an issue with me. And she was the first person to say, "You are the most ungrateful person I have ever met."
No.
Yeah. She said, "You know what? I'm a parent. My parents messed me up. I messed my kids up. That's what we do as parents. We mess our kids up. When are you going to take the deck that you've been dealt? When are you going to take that deck and create a winning hand?" I didn't understand it right when that happened, but that was the kick that I needed to push me in the right direction. And I kept using. I wanted. She believed in me to teach, and so I started teaching her technique, and I loved it. It was the one place in my life that I felt authentic and whole in myself, and I could be of help to people. And I decided that I wanted to teach that technique in the universities. So to do that, I had to leave the profession, and I had to go back to school, and so I did. And I moved to New Paltz, New York, and went to the State University of New York in New Paltz, and I finished my bachelor's degree. And of course, this was when I was in my mid-30s. So while I was finishing up my bachelor's degree, the faculty were my friends,
Right.
more than the students were because of the age difference. Because I knew how to sew, I volunteered in the costume shop, and the costume design teacher said, if you have to get your master's, you should go into theater technology because they'll pay. So I found myself,
Pay for your education.
they'll pay for my education.
Right. Okay.
I found myself, I have a gift to the gab, obviously. I talked myself into one of the best programs in the country for costume technology.
Wow.
And it was awesome, but at the same time, it was scary because I was in over my head. I did not have the skill set that I could have had, or at least that's what I told myself. My mentor at UT, I met him after I left, and he said, I have to tell you something. You were really good, and I didn't realize that. I didn't believe that. I didn't know that. I was in over my head, and I started using and drinking again. Wow. And so what happened was I didn't get my master's degree. I chose to go to rehab. I'm going to 12-step meetings all throughout all of this. And there I am in my sponsor's car, high as a kite. And I had this moment that was like, I don't think I can stop this. I don't know what to do because I'm going to die. And so I decided to take myself out of the general population and go to rehab. And it was there that I discovered the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that book saved my life. It helped me recognize where my shame comes from. And it brought me to a higher power. I spent most of my life just, running on my own energy, and it wasn't working.
Running from yourself.
Yeah. And it wasn't working, and it wasn't going right. And it wasn't, finally I found this higher power that I got to choose. And I started working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. After my rehab program, I moved to Phoenix, and I wanted to be a more active member of my family. My family has a business out in the Phoenix area, and I went to work for the family business. That's where I am. While I was in treatment, we would have group therapy, and I talked about one day how I had to use drugs because I felt shame about how I wanted to sexually express myself. And this blonde-haired Dallas housewife who was in the program with me looked at me and she said, "Well, sweetheart, why don't you just give yourself permission?" And it was like, yeah, this bomb went off, and I was like, is it really that easy? And so when I moved to Phoenix, I made the decision, I am going to live my truth. And so I started, hanging out in the leather and fetish community. And Phoenix has a great community. It's very diverse. We talk about things with each other. I started meeting people that I could ask questions about things that I was wondering about. They were free with their information, and I started living my truth. So much so that I ended up being Mr. Phoenix Leather 2018.
Wow.
And that sort of put me on this platform where I got to go to Chicago to compete for International Mr. Leather. And it was there and going through that experience that I did not realize the larger, the grand picture, that there were lots of people just like, and
so you said to yourself, I'm not the only leather gay in town.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. It allowed me to fill that hole. Like, I would just remember my sponsor sitting down and writing out this image for me and talking about the cycle of addiction. And it starts off that we're restless, irritable, and discontent. And so we choose to put something into our body, a drink, drug, whatever. And once we do that, there's this thing called the phenomenon of craving. And that means that once we put it in, we can't control when we stop. And we go on a spree, and then something happens and we do stop. And then we say, we're never going to do this again. We're going to get better. We're not going to do it. And then something happens and we get restless, irritable, and discontent. So it was this circle that he drew, and the circle had a little break in it, because when we finish our spree and we say we're never going to do it again, there's this space that we need to fill. And it was my spirituality that I was missing. And it was my authenticity that wasn't coming through. And so I would just skip that and go right back into restless, irritable, discontent. Right. Living authentically and saying, yes, I am a person who doesn't like to, I'm a person who does things differently. It allowed me to realize that everything that I had done in my life up to that point was preparing me for this moment. I started teaching, but I teach fetish skills now. And I teach people how to incorporate static electricity into their play. because that's what I love. I love first time I played with static electricity, I got this memory of when I was 3 years old. I would stand in my crib and take the light bulb out of the lamp socket and stick my finger in the socket.
What? What?
Yes. Yeah. And
you could electrocute yourself.
Yeah, I know. I now know that. I teach people how to do it safely now.
Wow.
Because I have learned how to do it safely.
Is it right out of the wall or is it battery packs? What?
You know what? I actually play with the thing called the violet wand, and what it does is it takes the current from the wall and it turns it into static electricity.
So like the stuff that you'd like walk across a carpet.
Exactly. It's the exact same thing. Okay. It's the exact same thing. And it's, so
you get the blast, but it doesn't kill you.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the largest sexual organ that we have on our body is our skin.
Yeah.
And you're stimulating the skin, so it creates, well, let's just say that every time that I teach, I sell, the vendors love me because I end up selling violet wands for them.
We should do that as a side biz.
I should. Boy Scotty and his violet, the Boy Scotty violet wand. That's true.
Name it.
That's true. I never thought about that. But now I do that. I teach. I take one of the classes that I taught about transforming into character, and I apply that to role play, which is one of the things that some people in the fetish community love doing. Is they love creating scenes and with characters and things. So I started this role play class.
So you're back to acting again.
Exactly. Exactly. And it all came from a dominant that I was with, who he was what we call a switch. And what that means is he was dominant, but he also loved to be submissive as well. Mm. And in our world, we have these things called power dynamics. So it's a relationship that is based on an exchange of power. So there's a dominant and a submissive. I identify as a submissive. And it was very evident to me that with this dominant, I was going to have to learn how to dominate him if I was going to be of service to him. And that really made me feel uncomfortable because I'm a submissive. So one day when I was in the shower, which is always where I do my best thinking because I'm naked and alone and with my higher power, I was like, well, why don't you try that character exercise and see what that does to becoming more dominant? So my dominant had talked to me about these men that he saw when he was at the fault line in LA and how he wanted to be with those men. So he kind of gave me an idea of who these men were. And I took this character exercise and I started working with myself and I developed this character, and his name is Buck, and his name's Buck Timber. Buck Timber. It's very nice to meet you. How you doing? Buck is he's a Southern biker, and he's a dominant. And what I found out about playing with Buck and with that sir, it became less about a sexual relationship and it became more about helping this young man come out in a healthy way. It helped him to heal some hurts from the past, because we would get together and we would start talking, and he would go into that sort of young 22-year-old kid mind space, and he would ask me questions.
But he wasn't 22.
No,
So
he's
an older
54.
guy, and he's flipping back. Okay.
Yeah, he's flipping back.
Huh. Interesting.
This authentic self deciding to go into fetish has taught me this is the spiritual part that I've missed. It's not just about getting off. We're processing things from our life. We're healing things with each other. If I'm going through something really difficult and I can't deal with it, I will talk to a friend and say, hey, will you flog me? Because it's a cathartic experience for me. It's a way for me to get that emotion out of my body that I just can't get out. It's a cleansing. Wow. There's such a spiritual aspect to what we do in the leather and fetish communities that it's helped me so much that I feel as a submissive, a way of being of service is to teach what I know so that I can help people. I had this kid in my role play class, and he said, I want to be dominant in my life. And I said, okay, so is there someone who you respect in your life? And he said, well, yeah, there's this one guy. And I said, okay, give me 3 qualities that you see this guy. 2 qualities that are kind of similar to each other, and then one that's completely different. And, he gave me 2 qualities that were similar, and then the 3rd quality that was different was dominant. And so what I do in this class is I have them just walk in a circle, and I take that first quality and I say, okay, so you're going to say, cocky is, and you're just going to give me one word descriptors. I don't want story, because I'm trying to get you past your ego into your creative self.
Right.
And so he starts walking around, and as he's saying these, these words, you just watch the energy work, slip into his body, and you watch it change his body. And then I have him layer the second quality on. And the third quality came up, and the third quality was dominant. And he had been walking in a circle and walking in a circle, and it was working and working. And the minute I said, okay, now dominant he stopped walking. I was like, okay, so he's going to have difficulty with this. So I started asking him questions, what color is dominant? How heavy is it? What does it feel like? And he started walking, and he was having difficulties. And I said, keep walking, just keep moving. And as he started walking again, he hit this moment where he said, dominant is me. And it was like, shook, the piece just fit in, and the entire energy in the room changed. And there was this man who was dominant. And I told him, I said, you have to leave right now and go down to the vendor mart and take this energy with you and see what happens. Well, he now has 2 submissives, and I keep in touch with him. I get to do that. I get to help someone, and that's amazing. So I like the sexual aspect of it, don't get me wrong, but a big part of it for me is actually healing the spiritual stuff in ourselves.
Now, that story didn't go the way I thought it would, because when you have him walking in the circle, he's doing number 1, number 2, then you say be dominant, and he stops. So what I was thinking was he became dominant, and he didn't want to do what you told him to do by walking in a circle. But that's not what happened.
No.
Okay.
He was having difficulties. Okay. He couldn't come up with descriptors because he didn't know what dominant was. And it's amazing. It's fun to watch what happens. My Violet Wand class is sort of my really fun crowd pleasing class. But the class that's near and dear to my heart is my role play class.
Why is it violet? Violet? Why is it violet?
Because the wand, the portion of the device that turns the electricity into static electricity, it needs an electrode. And so you have glass electrodes that you stick into the end of the wand, and that glass electrode has a gas in it.
Okay.
That actually lights up with a different color.
Okay.
So it's actually, when they first started making them, it ended up being like a violet color gas that got lit up. So that's why they called it a violet wand.
Oh.
So, yeah. So that kind of brings me to where I am today. I love what I do. I get to I teach classes on a national level, and I get to travel around the country. I'll do those classes. And because I do those classes, people reach out to me and say, hey, we're doing something in Denver, and, we want you to come and teach. And I'm like, okay. And I get to go and do it. So it's been, it's funny how recovery is based on my recovery and my fetish life are very intertwined with each other.
That was the exact word I was ahead of my head there.
Yeah.
You said, yeah.
Yeah. And I never realized the thing that but Sandy used to always tell me, the thing, put up roadblocks against are the things that you absolutely have to go for.
Huh.
And I've learned that that's so very, very true.
This has been interesting.
I hope so.
Before my guest leaves, I always ask, what couple things have you learned in your life? And you've talked about them, but just to give a synopsis here, what have you learned that you want to pass on to my listeners?
I guess the biggest thing is actually what Sandy taught me. What you fear the most, what you put up roadblocks against, you have to dive into it. You have to dive into it, because that is the key to opening yourself up. You got to go there, because you need to learn something about yourself. So that's the number one thing. But I also want to say something, because we're in such a weird world right now. And I really think that the thing I'd like to say is find a way to love humanity and practice that, be it through compassion, be it through gratitude, be it through being of service, because we're in this world where it's so polarized, and systems are shifting and moving and changing, and we're in this together. We're on our own personal journeys, but our own personal journeys are part of an entire collective.
Right.
So just fall in love with humanity. those are the two big things I'd like people to leave this with.
Great. Thanks for coming in and thanks for sharing. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks again, Scotty.